Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Lina Abu Habib, the director of the Asfari Institute, and I'm delighted to have you with us for this truly exceptional and amazing conversation with Christiane Amanpour. Firstly, I would like to welcome President Khouri, AUB trustees, and particularly Trustee Asfari, after whom this institute is named. I want to welcome wholeheartedly our three honorees today, our guests and diplomats and friends and partners of the Asfari Institute, Provost Dawi, and our dear friends from the AUB community and civil society organizations. It's a pleasure to have you with us. This is going to be a fast-paced conversation. I would like to ask President Khouri to kick us off with his welcome remarks.
In the interest of keeping it short, Christiane Amanpour has a spectacular speech tonight, so I have a formal introduction for her this evening, and I'm going to do a very quick informal one. We're greatly honored to have, I think, the person who many of us consider the most accomplished and brave journalist out there in the televised industry today, one who's made a case of publicly working to protect other journalists. We're in this awful era where journalists are being targeted, like healthcare workers. As a healthcare worker and former healthcare worker and journalist, I think we have much in common. But I think we all came to know Christiane with the first Gulf War, which turned out to be just a skirmish compared to the second Gulf War, and then with the breakup of the Balkans. And to tell you something amusing about the way, at least I think of the world in football teams, and I was just thinking, how good would Yugoslavia be today if they were still one team? But Christiane got to document and show us the breakup of that. Then she has gone on to another extraordinary career. Frankly speaking, the one thing I regret is we're going to miss her interview at 8 p.m. tonight with President Joseph Aoun. World exclusive. We're going to see it again on Monday. But we thought we'd turn the tables. Here's a great journalist who gets the world to tell themselves, who they are. Some people are difficult, some people are more forthcoming, but she manages to get an incredible crowd of unusual and interesting people. I think I've watched some 150 of your interviews over the years, mostly sadly on the YouTube. So we thought we would have a great journalist in our own Nora Boustany interview Christiane, and it turns out the two know each other. Now, this is not my idea. It's actually Jennifer Muller's idea, one of our senior writers. So I'm delighted to have this happen. Special thanks to the trustees for coming here, and my friend Ayman Asfari, who established this institute, who bet me that we couldn't get this building done on time, on budget, in the midst of crisis, and the result is on time, on budget, in the midst of crisis. And my sincere thanks to David Bradley, who nominated and flew to London to invite Christiane to accept this award. He's flying here for less than 24 hours just to be with us. So thank you, David.
And may I ask Trustee Ayman Asfari for a few words of welcome?
Thank you. I know we all want to listen to Christiane, so I'll make it in 2 minutes. First of all, when I wanted to do something for AUB, I really felt that AUB is not only a great academic institution. In my mind, it's the best civic institution in Lebanon and in the region. And I felt that AUB doesn't only produce, very good students and academicians, but it produces fantastic citizens. And really what I wanted to do from the very beginning is endow or set up this institute because of the importance I see for the AUB to produce the future citizens in the region. So this is one comment. Just on Christiane, I've followed Christiane for the last 40-some years. You've been around for a long time, Christiane, and I've known her now for the last 4 or 5 years. I think Christiane is, what's different about Christiane for everyone else is really she speaks truth to power. She doesn't mince his words. And with her, you know exactly where she stands. And this is very different from all reporters today. I don't know how long you'll survive when the ownership of CNN will change to to the Ellisons, but hopefully you will carry on with your reporting and we'll see a lot more of you. Welcome, Christiane. We're welcome to seeing you. Thank you.
And just rapidly, how this fast-paced session will go, I'm going to invite our honoree, Ms. Christiane Amanpour, and my colleague, Nora Boustany, for 40 minutes a tit-for-tat conversation. I think Nora has prepared some really insightful questions. And then after that, we will have 20 to 30 minutes again of very quick conversation with the participants, with everybody who is here. And then you're all invited to our beautiful terrace to continue to mingle and have a conversation. So Christiane, please, Nora.
It's an honor, Christiane, and a privilege to welcome one of the truth warriors into our midst at a time when, as you well know, impunity is galloping ahead of us and laying humanity at the altar of geopolitics. In your view, can courageous journalism, intrepid reporting, still make a difference the way you did with your colleagues in Rwanda, in Bosnia? Can we make an impact to influence policy still?
Okay, so I think that's a really important question. And can I just say I've always admired Nora Boustany. She was there doing the work way before I ever got my first reporting job. I used to read you in the Washington Post and be incredibly impressed. You're a phenomenal journalist. And I'm really, really happy to have seen you in the airport and to have heard that you're going to be hosting this conversation between us. I think that's an incredibly important question because when I started, and probably when you started, that wasn't even a question. That's what we did. That's what you do when you sign up to be a journalist, when you sign up to be the eyes and ears of a whole world who shouldn't and couldn't go to the places that we do in order to be able to bring the facts, the evidence, the truth of what's going on. So it's almost like a no-brainer. That's our DNA. But, as you say, several things have intervened. Lately, the corporate capture of news organizations, certainly in the United States, with incredible negative impact, especially under this current political environment, which is moving towards sycophancy and authoritarianism and all those words that we don't particularly like, and none of us have any derangement syndrome. This is actually happening, and you can see it unfolding. So you can see these corporate people who, for instance, took over your newspaper, the Washington Post, who came in saying that I believe in journalism, that this is something that I really want to do for the betterment of society, for our community, all the words that we associate with civil society and everything. This man, who was one of the richest men in the world, decided to put his money and his name on not just doing well, but doing good. Then things changed. The political environment changed, and he swung with the wind.
Bottom line.
Well, the wind, yeah, either politically or economically, whatever it is. The wind, and the standing up to the wind requires courage and commitment. So he decided that was his bet. But what's happened is that paper, while it still has phenomenal journalists, is not being allowed to do the kind of reporting that made it great, indispensable, unique, and of course it's Woodward and Bernstein's famous Watergate paper. And what is that paper about? What is that issue about? Accountability, investigative journalism. So there's another example happening right now, and that is the capture by a corporate of CBS. And you can see, I don't even have to say, you can see if you read the newspapers, if you look at the online, the social media, you see what's happening in their newsroom, the firings of people just because they dared hold their own leaders accountable and ask questions, the kind of questions that they would ask as journalists to whoever they were sent to interview, right? And destroying 60 Minutes is something that I think we should all really think about. I worked for 60 Minutes for 9 years, so it was, CNN and Don Hewitt. And as I said in many, many times, I thought I'd died and gone to journalism heaven in 1997 or so when I got the joint gig. And I was the first ever to get a joint contract. Mm-hmm. And I was a contributor for 60 Minutes to CNN. And I think when you start messing with that kind of stuff, the arrogance, the hubris, the sycophancy, most importantly, trying to avoid telling the truth, then I think we're in trouble, not just as journalists, but as citizens. As citizens, the citizens actually need, and democracies actually need, a strong pillar of democracy, which in the United States anyway is the fourth estate, i.e. the journalist, as written and protected and directed by the First Amendment of the US Constitution. So it's something that I take incredibly seriously, and I'm incredibly nervous. Having said that, look at the amazing Palestinian journalists, for instance, in
That was
Gaza.
gonna be my next
Look at the
question.
amazing Lebanese journalists here. Look at the journalists even in the United States or Hungary or wherever, where it has been difficult to go against the prevailing political winds. There still is great journalism.
Yes,
The
yes.
issue is, will our organizations support us? Not will we journalists keep doing it, but will our organizations support us? That's the issue.
Are any of these institutional changes that we have watched in horror, CBS, Washington Post, other examples, is any of this reversible, you think?
That's a good question.
Are
I hope
managers
so.
accountable?
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, generally, the bottom line is what defines a management or a manager's, term of life. But I don't know, because I'm not sure this is just about money. If it was about money, they wouldn't be messing with the single biggest cash cow that CBS has, and that's 60 Minutes.
Yeah.
Which, in this past year, so before new management, increased its linear, i.e. its television viewers by 9% under the executive producer who's just been fired, and has worked so hard to put a digital presence, which is the future, that it got over the latest figures of its digital is 2.5 billion views of 60 Minutes online, on social, all over the. That is humongous. In other words, an old product, which we have now for 60 years, 60 Minutes, has managed to meet the moment with its quality content and its indispensable journalism, and has also breached that third rail, which is the whole new way that we have to adapt or die, and that is digital.
Yes.
And of course, the New York Times did it so well under our current president, Mark Thompson. He did it when he was at the New York Times with some brilliant techies there. And 60 Minutes has done it so well. But why are they being punished? Political. They said.
To go back to Gaza a little bit.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, local journalists really made a difference in Gaza when the foreign press was banned from covering the story. Is. And they managed in their own unsophisticated way to carry to the world in real time news about the atrocities, the unfolding human disaster, and of the cruelty of man to man, that was unprecedented. This coverage had triggered demonstrations, moral outrage, all kinds of things we had never witnessed on the world stage. Now, my question to you is, none of this outrage has really made a difference. Yet journalists, especially dual national journalists, have had to kind of navigate this fine line between professionalism, being judged, pigeonholed. Do you think there's a growing role for local journalists? Should they be encouraged? Will they be allowed? And given the outrage we have witnessed, there has been a shift in the needle in how the Arab-Israeli conflict is viewed. But from your perspective as a professional, and a very assertive professional, is it less of a career kind of suicide to broach these subjects more openly? Is there less pushback?
Well, I never talk about career suicide because I tell the truth no matter what it is, when it is, and what might blowback come to me. And if any of you are online, you can see that I get a lot of blowback. But I don't pay attention to it. I don't actually read comments online about me. I just don't. It's the only way I can survive. It's the only way I can keep my mental health. And it's the only way I can keep my nerve to keep telling the stories. And I always advise, especially young people, like students in a university or wherever, please do not live or die by what's going on social media. Remember, social media is not a real place. It's a bunch of anonymous people or bots or algorithms or whatever it is. I use it in order to amplify my work, but I do not look at it. I do not read it. So that's number one. Number two, it is a problem because, and I'm working backwards from your stories, because from your questions, because the most important is the fact that we're banned from going in. But there has been a lot of what's the right word? Chicken-heartedness in the top echelons of a lot of Western media organizations and maybe others. How do you tell the story without being controversial? How do you always be neutral or impartial or whatever? In Bosnia, I had to make a decision as a very, very young reporter without all the experience that I have now. When I was confronted with first ethnic cleansing, which then developed into genocide, as adjudicated by the International Criminal Tribunal in The Hague. It's not my word, it's a legal term. And it happened on my watch. And I got into some trouble and some pushback by certain people in the West, and maybe elsewhere, who, A, their nations didn't want to intervene to stop the mass slaughter of Bosnian, happened to be Muslims, European Muslims, in Sarajevo and other cities. That was the majority of the Bosnian population, by the better armed Serb militias, non-state actors against civilians, supported by state actors, Serbia, i.e. Yugoslavia, with all the remnants of the personnel and weaponry of the Serbian regime. And I watched, on my watch, the Bosnians having been told that they had to fight with two hands behind their back because there was a UN arms embargo on them, while the Serbs, I assume, were still under the same embargo, but it didn't matter because they had all their stuff coming by road from Serbia down to the high points where they would, shell and snipe. So I watched men, women, and children who were not combatants being slaughtered on a daily basis. And it was also the very first time in modern war coverage and modern journalism where we journalists were not the good guys. We were considered by one side to be the bad guys. And it's usually by the side which has the power and that's doing the evil. And so they targeted us specifically. It wasn't by accident. We were targeted and targeted and targeted. One of my colleagues, Margaret Moth, was targeted. She had her face blown off, yes, basically, but she continued working when she was able to come back. But what I'm saying is that I made it my business to tell the truth, not even knowing what I was doing. I was just telling the stories. I was young. I was, 32 or something. Pretty young. I didn't realize what it meant. But what it did was develop a bit of a backlash. Oh, she's, this horrible term, gone native. Oh, she's pro-Muslim. Oh, she's lost her objectivity, all of this kind of stuff. Because, as you remember, people in the actual UN community and the Permanent Five and the Security Council did not want to intervene. Yeah. They told us lies, like this was centuries of ethnic hatred, like all sides are equally guilty. It just wasn't true. There were equal amounts of time in history where there was ethnic harmony, and we know that all sides weren't equally guilty. So I just had to think about what the heck is going on. They've just challenged my objectivity, and this is our golden rule. And I suddenly realized that in these kind of situations where this kind of grave violation of international humanitarian law and basic humanity are being violated, objectivity does not mean being neutral. Objectivity means talking to all sides and getting all sides of the story, but it never means, especially in these situations, equating and falsely equating either the moral imperative or the factual one. So I'm like, okay, I haven't lost my objectivity. Maybe it needs to be redefined. So I just said, in these cases, my mantra is truthful, not neutral.
Yes.
Now, forward that to what's happening now, particularly in Gaza, the occupied West Bank, elsewhere. And you have had, ever since October 7th, which frankly was the most heinous crime that was committed and did so much evil, not just to the Israelis and the civilian victims there. There is no justification for any harm done to any civilian anywhere. But it also boomeranged against the Palestinians, their own people, and their mentors or their protectors, Iran, Hezbollah, blah, blah, blah. They made a colossal mistake, morally, criminally, and strategically. That's one thing.
Yeah.
And they still haven't been held to account. I mean, they're sort of defeated, but they're still there, the Hamas. The Palestinians are paying for that terrible crime that they committed, and they're paying for the overreaction by Israel in its war against what happened and in its so-called war of self-defense. So you've got 70,000 at least dead on the Gaza side, and we have not been able to go in. So the Israeli ban on journalists into Gaza is indefensible on every single level, especially now that there's a ceasefire. They cannot rely on what they tell us publicly, which is just for your safety, because that's just obsolete. The continued ban on us is to prevent the world seeing the truth. But more importantly, I think, or as important, because we are not there, there is no what I call CNN effect or Sarajevo effect, because it is absolutely clear when we journalists are there en masse and we show what's going on, it becomes much less possible for the perpetrators, no matter what side, to keep continuing what they're doing. Democracies, in the end, do not want to see themselves in cold blood and technicolor supporting that kind of death, destruction, and horror. So, unfortunately, in this world, it is those of us on the outside who fly in and go, make a critical mass to tell these stories and to hopefully have an effect. Having said that, we owe a massive debt of gratitude, an internal debt of gratitude to the Palestinians who stayed and who told the story as hard as it was. And we did our best, as best we could, to tap into them as often as we could, and it was terribly difficult. Their safety, their lack of comms, their lack of food, their lack of, survival, etc. But they kept telling that story, and they're still telling the story. So the answer to your initial part of this question is yes. Local journalists have to be supported. In the end, they may be the only ones if we keep getting banned, And I still disagree with, if it was me running a news organization, I would have tried to get in, by hook or by crook.
Yeah.
We've done it in many other places.
One of your journalists did try, Clarissa.
No, she went in, to be fair, like many others, went in with, and it was great, but accompanied, which was great, but it was a few hours. She went in with the UAE, not the Israelis. The others have been able to go in on Israeli embeds. Whatever it is, it's a couple of hours. You see a little sliver.
What they want.
It's great, but it's not enough. We should be doing it, but we must always also round out, the rest of the story.
At the height of the Gaza crisis, a delegation of CNN journalists, and I think the group included you, decided to meet with the top brass and take issue with the way the coverage was proceeding. Is that right?
Well,
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Piss all over my company.
There's
a lot going on.
I know.
That is. But look, like any robust newsroom, many of us journalists, the reporters, the camera people, the field producers, everything else, we felt that we need to be more fair, more balanced, and also pushing more to get in. So those were the issues. And look, I would say that we did get more fair and more balanced, for sure. And unfortunately, we have not been successful. But if you look at, for instance, Jeremy Diamond, CNN's Jeremy Diamond, what he's been doing on the occupied West Bank is actually really amazing.
Excellent, yes.
And he's been really confronting the settlers, the Israeli security forces who enable or support
the IDF.
Yeah, all of that. And that's been caught on camera, and he's done very powerful reports on that.
And has there been pushback against his coverage?
From where?
People who don't want that story
I'm sure
to be
there has.
told. Yeah.
Every day you do something and people malign you.
Yeah.
But it's on the air, and that's what counts.
To move to another section, you have interviewed so many heads of state, warlords, criminals, destitute women. Is there kind of a remarkable, memorable one that stays with you, that has contributed to your growth as a person, as a journalist, that you consider maybe the highlight of your career, or your coming into your own as a journalist?
I do think Bosnia was my coming into my own as a journalist. My previous big sort of entrance into the world was the first Gulf War, but it was totally different. You know, it was two armies against armies. It wasn't a war against civilians. It was a set piece, as we knew wars are, you know. But going to Bosnia and seeing that it was a war against civilians, and since then most wars are wars against civilians, that was a turning point in my life, and it did shape me. And so I would say some of the most important interviews in my formative period, which I consider Bosnia to be, was with children, with mothers, even with fathers, people who were non-combatants but had lost everything, and on top of that, still had the grace and the humanity, you know, and the dignity to keep going, and the refusal to harbor hatred. I found that really incredible, and I'm talking about now the side of the victims. It's very, very, what's the right word to use? It's very disheartening when you go to the side of the aggressors and you speak to them, and they also have their story, but it's so, in this case anyway, out of the real zone. It's just so made up. It's such victimhood that is not borne out by facts. It's a political, you know, a political game that they were told to do. And it was, the Bosnia thing was in aid of a greater Serbia, and in aid to cleanse an area, mostly around the Bosnia-Serb border, to be able to capture territory and an ethnically pure state. So that brought all those horrible things. I mean, frankly, you know, I did grow up in the era of never again after the Second World War. I mean, I was young, it didn't really inform me as a child because I didn't really understand it, but I did understand it when I got to Bosnia, and I did understand that what happened to the Jews in Europe at that time was absolutely horrific. The kind of crime that has no equal, right? And even though there have been the Nakba and all the stuff that other parts of the world have gone through, and nobody has a moral claim to victimhood and pain, or the imperative is what I'm saying. You know, it's not a competition over whatever. But I really learned that's why I was so intent on my reporting in Bosnia and talking about the civilians, because I'm like, dudes, you told us never again. And you, who signed the Geneva Conventions and are members of the Security Council and the UN, which was set up never to have these wars again, you're not doing anything. You're not doing anything. So those were very important to me. And then in terms of leaders and things, just working from most recently, I would say one of the great wartime leaders is President Volodymyr Zelensky. He is unbelievably impressive, unbelievably impressive. From the day he stood out with his little camouflage, you know, jacket and said, I'm here, we're not going anywhere, we will defend our country, when actually the US, Britain, France, certainly Putin, thought that this was going to be over in 2 or 3 days. He made a stand and he rallied the people, and to this day they're fighting. And to this day, guess what? They are not losing. They're not losing. And they may even be
gaining
on a par.
Bit.
Definitely gaining, but on a par. If they could just be supported more to make Putin understand that he has to come to the negotiating table, that would be very helpful. But very, very impressive. Very impressive. And when you consider, and if you listen to the interviews, the way he speaks is very impressive. And if you consider that his formative years, I mean, his professional experience was as an entertainer.
Yes.
I mean, you know, there's entertainers and then there's entertainers, if you get my drift. They're television reality stars, and then they're both of whom have become presidents. Yeah. Which one is doing better? Which one is upholding the democratic and institutional norms and fighting for them? Definitely the president of Ukraine. I think it's an absolute masterclass. I've interviewed Yasser Arafat several times before he died, clearly, and several times he hung up on me and got very angry with me. And do you know you are talking to General Arafat?
Yes.
You know, and all of that kind of stuff. But he was very entertaining, very entertaining. And also, I admired him and I admired Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin for actually doing what your president has said needs to be done right now, and that is men of war, because it's always the men of war have to lay down their arms and realize, you're laughing at me, have to be big enough to understand that you actually cannot, there is no military solution.
Yeah.
Look at what's happening here. How long has this been going on in this country?
52 years.
And every single time the superior force fights to establish deterrence and to establish security for their northern citizens, this lot, the non-state actors, they come up with more asymmetrical, innovative, stuff that prevents a normal victory if it was a proper set piece. So obviously war is not the solution. It's not the solution between Russia and Ukraine either. There has to be a negotiated solution. And that is my belief, and that is what I try to work for, what I try to interview for. I try to also tell the story of the other always, so that people can see that other people have their own narratives and that they're human beings and then they're not, subhuman. And I reject the idea of dehumanizing those who you don't know or you don't understand or whatever. So, that's my little contribution, to try to tell and show that we're all human, we all exactly have the same, pain, and we bleed the same color, and mothers like their children no matter which side of which political spectrum they're on. Love their children.
Your heart-forward kind of coverage, which was phenomenal during the Bosnian War, and which continued, and now you're in a slightly different chapter of your career, where you confront leaders and you try to push the diplomatic solution forward by bringing Palestinians and Israelis together, often on the same program.
Often.
But all that coverage, all these wars, have they taken their toll on you? How do you survive as a professional, as a human being?
Well, I don't know why my glasses are fogging up. Maybe that's a
Humidity.
statement. No, look. In my time, there was no mental health professionals. There was no,
trauma training.
None of that. You just did it, or you didn't. Or you sunk into drugs and drink and all the rest of it. And many people had much shortened careers because of the pain that they'd seen and they couldn't assimilate. I don't know how I got lucky, but I did. In that I saw so much that even today, is pretty triggering. But I had a very good family, very good friends, and I had the sense to take enough breaks so that I could recharge and go back. And it was instinctive. But it's certainly very, very traumatic. It's very triggering. I do have PTSD. I don't know what happened at dinner the other night. There was, something fell and I jumped. Maybe that's a normal human reaction, but, I still brace myself. Yes. and but I still do it. And, I've been in Ukraine quite a lot. I would have been in Gaza, but I'm not. Nor was anybody else except the Palestinians who've done heroic work. I think one of the things that took me out of doing daily work, I had my son kind of late in life. And by the way, by that time, I had actually achieved quite a lot. So I wasn't a young journalist who was trying to climb the ladder and be a mother and be a wife and this and that. So I did actually, sort of really tailor, except of course after he was born, 9/11 happened and then the Iraq war happened, so it was a lot of work until he was about 3 or 3.5 or whatever. I was away a lot, but I would try to come back every 2 weeks. I still don't tell my company that I would come back every 2 weeks. They probably don't remember, but it was unheard of, right? because you're meant to be there for months and months, and then I would go back, and then I would come back, just so he didn't forget me. But I did make a obvious decision that it was time for me to be a mum, and that's one of the reasons why I went more into the studio work, because my son at that time, I don't know whether I'm rationalizing it, but when he was very young, I felt that he didn't really mind, like when he was a year or whatever. But when he got to be, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, then they really need you, homework and after school trips or, sports and just being there as a mother. And I was very strict on social media and devices, never in his bedroom, ever.
Good.
So and I moved to New York because my then husband was working for Hillary Clinton on the 2007 US presidential campaign. Barack Obama won the primary, and that was that. But we stayed in New York for about 6 years, and that allowed me a more regular schedule, because I got this show and I had actual hours that I could take my son to school and bring him back from school, and we did our homework together at the dining room table, and that was my sort of personal life. Yeah.
As a professional, have you had any regrets? Is there anything you wish you had done differently? Or a story you would have covered
wish
differently?
I could have gotten more behind quote-unquote enemy lines. I wish I could do more in Russia, for instance, as I do, just to understand what they're thinking, and to hold that lot accountable. I wish I could do more in many of these countries that bar us. I did a huge amount of work in Iran, and I do believe that I brought a more rounded picture of Iran to the world than had been there. But then I was banned from 2009 when they had the so-called Green Revolution,
Yes.
and we were in the streets we had some new technology which enabled us to go live much more rapidly and more nimbly. We didn't have to wait for hours to go back to the hotel and set up a big satellite dish. We could do it kind of right from the action, and we showed the Iranian regime in real time, because we were there, and the rest of the world, that the biggest counter-regime protest that had ever happened since 1979. And because of that, they got very upset and essentially threatened me with arrest and kicked me out. And I've never been back. I don't. Does anybody remember the name Ahmadinejad?
Oh, yeah.
Did anybody laugh their heads off?
Yes.
When the Israelis apparently thought that would be a good partner in a post-world, the Holocaust denier, the wipe Israel off the face of the map guy, the anti-democratic, in a big way, violent guy, Green Revolution guy, and, by the way, an evangelist, the guy who believes in huge conflagration until the Mahdi comes, and the aggressive face of Iran's nuclear program. That was their choice.
Iran and Lebanon find themselves, at the moment, at least the people of Iran and Lebanon, between two extreme forces, a fascist militia or a regime and its opponents. Yet there is the third wave. Vali Nasr calls it the third wave. People who are real patriots, the silent majority, if you will, people who would like neither this side nor this side to win and blindly forget the other. Should the press do more to cover the in-between factions that are really suffering?
Yes. Part of it is access, and part of it is what do our bosses think that they are, in this day of financial stress and business disruption, where do they think that we should go? But a lot of it is access. And the other thing that we don't do enough of is, tell the positive stories about, for instance, community building, about being citizens, about certain, sides of different conflicts. And you've used the example of Israelis and Palestinians, who I try to do a lot on my program, because it's really moving to hear stories of people who've suffered, I'm talking about civilians, and who are also trying to nation build, or rather peace build. And I think we don't, and there are hopeful, shoots. In other words, there is hope, because people are still dedicated to that, even despite all the evidence against it. And I feel that we should tell more of those stories, because I think that in telling these stories, it it makes it more real, and it makes people see that, oh, there might be another way. Yeah.
Yeah, like we're against the regime, but we don't want to be bombed. You can't bomb a nation into sovereignty or into a different regime.
Mm-hmm.
At the expense of stealing some of the thunder from your interview with President Aoun, do you mind giving us a bit of a glimpse?
Sure, sure. Some of it, a tiny little snippet has already gone out. I did it this morning at 10:30 a.m. to be precise. He said several things, obviously, about what we're talking about. Clearly, he's committed to a ceasefire. Clearly, he understands the perils of the state of Israel and the state of Lebanon agreeing to a ceasefire, but not the actual non-state militia who's causing the need for a ceasefire, or he's one party to this situation. So clearly, trying his best to persuade whoever has influence over Hezbollah to get them to the table. He was very, very angry about Iran, saying that he obviously wanted good relations, but this is not your country, these are not your people, these are Lebanese people, and this is Lebanon, it's not Iran, and they're not Iranians, and it's also, these are not Hezbollahis, these are Lebanese people. So he's quite clear about that. He also clearly spoke about the root causes, that it'll only work out if Israel stops its occupation and pulls back, but clearly it takes two to tango, and there has to be some table discussion to make sure that each side doesn't feel threatened by the other. Otherwise, it's never going to work. Also, as a military person, he, as you probably all know, still carries shrapnel in his body from having been wounded. He said, look, we can fight and fight and fight, but it will not be solved on the battlefield. It just will not. He had clear messages when I asked him what he would say to the Israelis, what he would say to the Iranians, even what he would say to the Lebanese people. He was very robust, and he knows that his is a mostly ceremonial position, but he has certain prerogative over things like negotiations and things like that. When I read to him that, I keep getting his name the wrong way around. Is it Naim Qassem?
Naim Qassem.
I kept calling him Qassem Naim, and I had to keep changing it.
Okay.
Anyway, Naim Qassem, not as charismatic as Hassan Nasrallah, whose name I do in fact remember, has said that the people of Lebanon should reject, the government's farcical stance for peace talks and this, that. And he says, they can say whatever they like, but this is the only way out of this. It has to be a win-win, and it will never be. It'll never be on the military. And he said, look at what's happening to our country. He also recognizes something that obviously you all know very deeply, but maybe the rest of the world doesn't know, is that the majority of Lebanese, including the Shiite population, have had enough of this. And so, as always, the question is, okay, so how do you implement all of that? And I think one of his aims in talking was to put that out to an international audience. I think he absolutely believes that the United States is critical to the positive outcome, if it's possible, of any of this. He thanked President Trump, as he would in an international interview that's going to be aired on CNN USA, but he meant it. He said he calls me, he's interested, he says, how can I help you, and this and that. Yeah.
Did he have a novel approach towards solving this disarmament hurdle?
So they talk about these pilot, these pilot islands or pilot zones or whatever zones, whereby you go to one place. And he used the Beaufort castle as an epicenter of it. You go there, you start to, do some real, confidence building, and you start to sort of build from the inside out. To be honest with you, it sounded a lot to me. I can't remember what they called it, but the American mission in Afghanistan did a lot of that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But he did say that the first part of any peace is the end of the war. So he doesn't believe that these talks with Israel, between Israelis and Lebanese officials, are a peace negotiation, or an end of war negotiation. No, or a normalization, however you call it.
Yeah, normalization.
The first bit has to be an end to the war, and only then can you then amplify that to have actual diplomatic relations, normalization, and all the rest of it. He said you cannot go from 0 to 100 overnight. And we've seen that with, he mentioned the FARC in Colombia, he mentioned the IRA, he mentioned any number of long, decades-long wars that are never, solved overnight. And I can tell you from having covered the Northern Ireland peace talks, that it took another decade to get the IRA to decommission, they called it then. And to be honest with you, the interesting part of this is, from my memory and my experience, is that it's all, a lot of it is about vocabulary and about politics and just doing it sort of, step by step. Because decommissioning, i.e. disarming, can only happen at a certain point, and then the rest of it happens thereafter. So he knows it's tough, and it's tough.
Christiane, thank you.
Thank you.
You have been phenomenal. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you,
We're
Nora.
credit to the profession.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nora. That was truly interesting. No, you're not. It's not over yet, Christiane.
No, I didn't. No, go ahead. That's not what I meant. Go ahead.
Everybody was really happy that you were here. There was a lot of excitement that you're joining us. We're all fangirling, actually. And so we want to take a few minutes for rapid questions from the audience. And I will respectfully ask all my colleagues, our guests, to be succinct, because we only have like 15 minutes with Ms. Amanpour. Those of you who know the commencement exercises know that this is going on. This is going to be a long day for you. So
No. So I'm really happy. I also like taking Q&A. And to your point, it's always, can I have a question and not a speech, please?
yes, exactly. Again, questions, not comments, not speeches.
Hello, my name is Rana Al-Mosri, and I'm a senior political science and public administration, graduating tomorrow.
Congratulations.
So, my question is the following. After all the conflicts you've covered, what gives you perseverance and gives you hope to continue after this in areas where there is repeated conflicts like the South, like Gaza? What keeps you going? What's your purpose?
It's a really good question, and you just said it, purpose. It's purpose. It's a sense of purpose. It's a sense of mission. It's a sense of belief that if you tell the story, they will come, or they'll understand, they'll listen, and maybe they'll do something. And by they, I mean the outside world, really, who are powerful enough to actually do something, as long as they want to. I do think, as I said to Nora, that part of our power is to be amplifiers, and to go places and tell stories of ordinary people which demonstrate what's being done to them and what's happening on a bigger level, but not always just to be political. So what keeps me going is always hearing the stories of ordinary people, who have often suffered so much. Many people in many of the war zones I've been. I mean, it's awful to think they're living in, as you just said, in such horrendous conditions. And they're educated, and they're professionals, and they're philosophers, and they're poets, and they're doctors, and they're, it's not just some unnamed mass of humanity. So my purpose is to try, as I said, to humanize people, and therefore the situation, and try to get those sitting thousands and thousands of miles away with the most power to understand that they too are people. And they too deserve a fair shake. And if you're a superpower or any middle power with the ability to help, you should. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but it's also the safe and secure thing to do. So I believe negotiating and peacemaking is not a sign of weakness. Like some believe that anything is a zero-sum game. Like some believe that you have to force the other side to lose, force them into unconditional surrender or capitulation. It doesn't work. So the point of my reporting is to keep trying to say that. I mean, here I've just met with the Norwegian ambassador here, and she knows very well that in this region, Norway was very instrumental in trying to bring peace between Israel and the Palestinians through the Oslo Accords. For many reasons, it didn't work, but the paradigm is still important. The idea is still important. And the way they did it was first by breaking down these massive walls of distrust. and trying to get, I mean, really, the people who convened, the Palestinians and the Israelis, secretly at that time, started by having meals together in a third country, talking about their families, talking about their hopes and their dreams, and suddenly, you know, whoa, my enemy has the same dreams as I do. My enemy has children. My enemy has a wife, a husband, a mother, a sister, a brother, whatever. My enemy wants to make the world a livable place for his children. So that's kind of what keeps me going. And also, I know that it's a really great profession, and I know that it's a positive force for the world when it's done right. And I believe strongly, specifically in well, now in democracies as well, but in non-democracies, journalism, good journalism, can be the cutting edge of reform towards a better, you know, civil society.
Let me take two questions. Our trustee and then Jailan.
Okay. I'm Melanie Kamet, trustee and professor of political science at Harvard University. So thank you for believing in and reporting on the truth. And I'm wondering, the media landscape has evolved so much since you started your career. It's more fragmented. People opt into ideologically aligned sources. So how does that affect, in your estimation, your ability to make an impact? Where do you see that you're able to make an impact?
Well, can I just first congratulate Melanie and David for being the Americans who came here, first and foremost. I think it's super important, and well done you for showing up and showing your solidarity and commitment to this great university, number one. Okay, so then I should take another question?
Yes. Jailan, maybe.
Hello, my name is Jailan. I'm the country representative of UN Women in Lebanon. My question is, you spoke about objectivity and about truth. And how do you define objectivity and truth in a country like Lebanon, where multiple communities have very different perspectives of what the truth is, and the truth makes sense from where they came from? Everybody's journey leads to their understanding of truth. So how do you define objectivity, and how do you become objective and truth in a context like that? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So working backwards, you're talking about the fragmented world, Melanie, right? And the do I remember right? But I don't think two questions is good for me.
Okay, let's do one by one.
give me the bullet point.
Sort of people opting into
their preferred Yes. Super important point, and really I take it on board because it's very difficult. Not only has that been going on actually since very close to when I started my career, because you started with Fox News, you know, there was CNN, which was meant to be kind of middle of the road. It didn't really have a political agenda, certainly not an overt political agenda, and it was really about reporting. So it sent all us people out to report. It was way before we had talking heads and panels and all the rest of it. That's all we did, we reported. Then up came the new sort of organizations which felt that they had a monetary advantage by becoming politically affiliated and organized and drawing people to them sides. And that's one of the main, certainly in my realm, in cable television, one of the main points of differentiation between political silos and echo chambers and just straight reporting. And then fast forward all these decades, you've got technology which has just amplified all of that, and not in a good way. In one way, yes, it sends things out to a wider group that maybe would have got them before it was just satellite and cable and this and that. But on the other hand, it's muddied the waters even more, and with the, you know, the unnatural algorithmic dominance, which is not about anything other than technology directing you somewhere, it has created people's beliefs and truths and, you know, silos and all the rest of it. On top of that is that truth itself now is being debated. So if the sky is, you know, if we can't agree that the sky is blue and the grass is green, then we are screwed as a humanity. And that's one of the big battles that we face right now, huge. So how do you do it? I think that, to be honest with you, almost involves individual brands. people's brands who've been around for a long time and are known for integrity and trust and going there and being there, and organizational brands. There are a number of very, very prominent legacy news organizations around the world in every country that are still committed to telling the facts and the truth. And then people can go, so I always say, do the good housekeeping seal of approval. Choose one or two outlets that you really trust to get your meat and potatoes. And then if you want dessert, and want to head down a rabbit hole and waste your time doom scrolling and, filling your head with conspiracies and nonsense, then feel free. But first, go to the right. I actually believe now that it's not just our responsibility, it's the consumer's responsibility. They absolutely have to understand the world that we're in, and if everybody wants to, have a diet that is healthy, you need to pick the healthy food. If not, we're all screwed. And I don't know whether it's fixable. Honestly, this algorithm thing is really, and now with AI and all the rest of it, I don't know, but, we keep trying.
Jaylan was asking about truth and objectivity.
So, as I told you, I learned objectivity in Bosnia, and that's it. I have no wiggle room around that. You're truthful, not neutral. By truthful means not falsely equating, not thinking that everybody has, not being neutral when you can't be neutral in genocide or other such things. Rape, for instance, murder. There are many places where you cannot be neutral, and I know what you're saying, and I grew up in that situation. So Bosnia was like Lebanon. I mean, it was balkanized. It was three faiths, three communities: Catholic, Serb, Christian Orthodox, and European Muslim, the Bosnians. And they had their own histories, and they had their own stories, and they had their own traditions and cultures, and this and that. But, and for a while during the war, it was a problem because nobody knew who to believe or what to believe or whatever, and the propaganda was very strong on the TV. They did it, certainly the Serbs did it very, very well. They were very good, very good. But it doesn't mean to say it doesn't exist. You just have to keep trying to, tell the facts and follow the evidence and convince people like that. But I don't think you'll ever, you're never going to get a community to break from their fundamental, religious, cultural beliefs. You just have to hope that there is a certain set of facts in the middle that we can all agree with, and a certain set of objectives, like let's live together, let's be peaceful, let's have a future for our children, let's have a prosperous sovereign state. Surely every community in this country can agree to that, a prosperous sovereign state that's not at war. Now, how do we get there? That's for the humans to figure out.
Wow, many hands. Let's go to this side. One of our students first, and then the gentleman and then President.
Hello, Shana Mhanna, student double majoring in political science and public administration, graduating tomorrow. Nice to meet you. Having covered multiple conflicts around the world, what would you say is a lesson that the Lebanese people could benefit from in terms of a society successfully going out of conflicts? Because I feel this is something we suffer from, and having been in perpetual conflict, the Lebanese society specifically needs to find a way that can get out of this internal conflict peacefully. So from your experience, what lessons do you think we could learn?
Well, look, I have to say, clearly you've been at it for 60 plus years, this decades and decades, and it seems to keep cropping up. And there are root causes, and none of those root causes are addressed. So I feel that they need to be addressed. But more to the point, if you go back to Northern Ireland or even South Africa, which wasn't necessarily a war, but it was a minority dominating, oppressing, controlling a huge majority, right? The apartheid regime. In the end, it took leaders from within. It took Nelson Mandela, who was always trying to get equality, but he finally met a white president, F.W. de Klerk, who realized that the war was never going to be won. And that not only that, the rest of the world was isolating his country. There was a successful sanctions operation by the rest of the world that isolated on every level: business, sports, culture, everything. The white apartheid government there. And finally, there was a moment that de Klerk, and there's many things that led to it, but this particular president realized that the time was right to do it. So he and Mandela, and he, gradually Mandela was, moved to a better prison and then released, and then, Mandela also had to face down his, within the black community, if you remember the Zulus, the Buthelezi, he didn't, there was going to be a primary fight, and I mean a bloody one, before we got to elections, and he had to go out and calm his, right wing, so to speak, or his militant wing in his own community. And so it took the dedication of leaders on both sides, helped and midwifed by others who could help and midwife and say, well, if you do this, then you'll have these, you'll be re-entered into the world, you'll have better prospects, and this and that. And then I think what was very important, and by the way, it's not perfect. I'm not pretending it's perfect. There's still many issues. But they had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Yeah. And that was innovative and a first in modern history. And it was really important, whereby the victims could go and have their say, and the perpetrators would confess or be punished, basically. They would admit and confess and apologize and, reconstitute. So I think that's one way. The other way is Northern Ireland, which is after 30 years. I mean, 30 years, it sounds tiny compared to what you've all been going through in the Middle East. And between Israel and the Palestinians, it's 80 years. It requires leadership. It requires leadership that does not feel that the only way to get out of this is A, to have everything, a zero-sum game, and B, by violence. 80 years of violence have shown that it's not the way. So there was a moment, I truly believe there was that moment in 1993 after the Oslo Accords. I believe that Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat were committed. I believe it. And they did a lot of things. It didn't turn out. Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. Arafat couldn't bring himself to accept the 2000 Camp David, even though he said he would several months later, and then it was too late because Clinton had left office. I do believe that was a missed opportunity. I know many Palestinians don't agree with that, but I think that the future politicians, as you've seen, have not wanted to have a Palestinian state. Yeah. So there's that paradigm. The Northern Ireland paradigm is another one. They'd gradually been brought in, and actually it was, to an extent, it was the Americans, Bill Clinton, who was convinced to bring in the IRA into IE. He didn't call himself IRA, but he was. Jerry Adams positioned himself as the political wing, the head of Sinn Féin, and he managed to get a visa through the Kennedys, prominent Irish Americans, and he was convinced to go into negotiations with the British government under a receptive British government, Tony Blair. By the way, his predecessor, who was a conservative, John Major, had started the idea. So it wasn't partisan in this case. Both political parties in the UK were behind it. And it took a year or more of painstaking negotiations just to get to the Good Friday Agreement. And even after that, there was a terrible terrorist attack by a remnant of the IRA. I think they call themselves the real IRA. Literally 2 or maybe 4 months, 3 months after the Good Friday Agreement, one of the worst bombings of civilians in Ireland, and it could have derailed it, but all the parties came together to make sure it didn't. And then the decommissioning, the disarmament of the IRA took another 10 years. Through negotiations and talk, and then burying them, and then doing this, and then being able to keep handguns and putting the worst ones away. I mean, it was a huge process that didn't happen overnight. So those are the, and then of course you've got what happened in Colombia, but that's a little bit dodgy still right now. So there are models, but I think it goes down to exhaustion. People who are really smart leaders know that they cannot win this militarily, and those military leaders being strong enough, and I consider Arafat a military leader of his people, of the defense of the Palestinian people, and clearly Yitzhak Rabin had been army commander and military chief as well as prime minister, to take a brave step. It takes courage. It really does take courage to wage peace. because it's so easy not to. It sounds paradoxical, but it does take courage, because you've got everybody on your right and left flanks wanting to disable it and to make it not work. It's amazing how many people are against peace in this world. Yeah. It's really, that's one of the mind-blowing things that I can't ever understand.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me this question. My name is Rita Barutta. I'm a researcher and a journalist myself. I know many of us here are interested in politics, but I'm interested in gender. You're a fantastic journalist, well-known, renowned all over the world, that sits with warlords, that sits with criminals and leaders that are all men, bringing in onto the table all the toxic masculinity there is. How did you manage all that?
In my time, you had to be a little bit of a man, even as a woman, to get this job done, because it was tough, and women, girls were not sent to the front lines or whatever. So that's one of the reasons why you might find me fairly prominent, because I was one of the first TV women in the West with the first Gulf War and then on and on. But I told you I had a very good family, and I had a very, very exemplary upbringing, in that my father was Persian Shiite Muslim, and my mother was English Catholic. And my father wasn't really observant religiously, but my mother was. But to say that they brought me up by example, and not even by force feeding, to understand that there is nothing a woman can't do. My father never, ever, ever said to me that there's nothing or no ambition that I couldn't entertain, or no sport that I couldn't do, or no no matter how tomboyish or whatever, it was fine, I could do it. And my mother, by example, she kind of ran the household. She didn't work outside the house, as they say, but she was the dominant force in our family, showed me that women have power. And so when I started working, I just assumed it. I just assumed it, that I was going to be just fine, and that I wasn't going to have to fight. I just didn't even think that I would. And that attitude, I think, looking back, although I didn't fully take it on board while I was doing it, was probably very useful and very helpful. It's the same attitude that I employ in all of these terrains, especially in the Muslim world, where you're banned many times as a woman from going here or there, but also you're allowed as a woman to go into the women's quarters, to talk to women unaccompanied and this and that, and that's always been a bit of a superpower, actually, for journalists who are women, who can get that whole other side of the story, as well as getting the warlords and the warriors and all the rest of it. I realize I'm not being flippant here. Women are still underpaid for the same job, underrepresented in where they should be. We are half the world, if not more than half the world, by a tiny fraction of a percentage. As you know, I don't know about this university, but in many universities, including in Iran, by the way, including under the Islamic revolutionaries, women make up the bulk of the university graduates, and it's incredibly important. Maybe here as well? Yeah.
Slight majority.
Yeah. There you go. It's pretty amazing. And women, of course, suffer disproportionately from sexual assault and other, domestic violence and all the rest of it. So it's not easy at all. But we have to keep doing it. We have to keep pushing it. And I will say, because we're going to take one last question from a man. I will say that it's in our interest to have a much better gender relationship. We need to have our male allies. I've always said that in every speech I give on gender or women or whatever. And I learned that from Billie Jean King, who is the proponent of Title IX, who is one of the most important equality leaders in the world, and who actually could have won more Grand Slams had she not been so politically active and involved on behalf of women and equality. So I think it's really, really important. We need our male allies. We cannot afford to somehow create some kind of toxic manosphere and I don't know what else. We need to be able to work together. But just like in peace, in war and peace, the more powerful side has to give. You have to put your hand out. Absolutely. And the more powerful side in our society is men, and the more powerful side in war and peace, well, in this case, it's the Israelis. In the other case, it's the Russians. So they And I learned that actually from a very top British, the top MI6 guy. He said in all of these institutions, even in IRA land, the Brits had to make one of the first steps towards. And I think that's a really important lesson.
Our last question.
Where's our token woman
You're
man?
the token guy. The token bro.
What is the responsibility of social media outlets? Should they be like the model of X, Twitter, where anything goes? You
No.
can be a bigot, you can be,
No.
you can hate Jews, Muslims, or should there be some kind of monitoring of speech within certain standards like traditional media?
Yes. The very short answer is yes. And why? Because they pretend to operate in our space as purveyors of truth and information. Only they're not, because they're not regulated. We are regulated. We have rules and norms. There's even a federal thing, the FCC, you know, all our objectivity rules, all the sort of, you know, the rules of the trade and the craft. We have rules. We can be taken to court if we defame or tell deliberate untruths or whatever. So we have a structure that regulates what we as journalists do. So I'm absolutely convinced, and all my friends and colleagues who are in that space and trying to regulate social media believe the same thing. They should be regulated. Unfortunately, the tech bros, and the main ones being, you know, the Zuckerbergs and the, I don't know who else, have, you know, contaminated our living space, they go to Congress and they befuddle a bunch of elderly people, you know, with their tech talk, and the guys sit there and they're like, oh, wow, okay, well, yeah, oh, man, okay, if he says he's going to do that, well, I'm going to believe him. And then Zuckerberg walks out, and he's not given any commitment to anybody about anything. He's not being held accountable, and he's one of the worst offenders right now, according to, you know, public documents. That it is all about the bottom line. It's all about money, and they really don't care. I have a great friend in London. Her name is Biban Kidron. She's a crossbench baroness. Anyway, she's in the House of Lords, but she works on this issue, and she has done a lot of work to get the Brits to regulate more and to have them step up, and even more now during the AI. Because if social media was as evil as it is, and as poisonous and as toxic, then AI is potentially used in that regard, and in that way, untrammeled, unaccountable, is going to be even worse. And again, it's all the bottom line. I'm actually quite encouraged by what I hear from some AI leaders who also understand this and who want to figure out how to have all of them, not just one. It has to be everybody in some kind of paradigm of regulation, so that they don't increase exponentially something that has really toxified society all over the world.
Yeah.
And I mean, it really has. It's an addiction. You know, I remember the tobacco companies who would say that, no, this is not toxic. It was 60 Minutes who revealed the big tobacco companies had been lying because they had the research knowing that tobacco, nicotine, whatever it was, nicotine, I guess, was addictive. And they had been lying and lying and lying, and 60 Minutes finally investigated it and brought it out, and they were then hauled before Congress and held accountable. But the same with social media. It's addictive. There was a recent ruling, I don't know, was it somewhere in the United States, which basically agreed with that. A court said, yes, it is, and you have to do something about it. What they'll do about it remains to be seen. But I think it's a big worry, and we've seen it, so we need to wake up. We've seen it in its infancy. Now that it's going to mature into AI capabilities, we need to really wake up so that we can harness the best of the technology and not be overwhelmed. And in this case, again, I'm not an expert, but people are talking about an extinction moment. You know, that's scary. I don't know whether that's true. I don't know enough about it. But that's scary. And we don't want to be doing it to ourselves.
Christiane, I have to stop, but what the point that you said about the tech bros, just a couple of days ago, we ended in a conference in Spain on foreign policy, and one of the people who were closing said something about the tech bros: 100% power, 0% accountability.
That's right. It's
and
true.
that is really, really scary.
In Europe, it's better. In the United States, it's useless.
Yeah,
terrible.
exactly.
And I just wanted to recognize and congratulate, obviously, my fellow honorees. I'm so proud to be in your company. Oh, good question. He's 26. Yes. And you think he should be 36, right? I told you I did it late. Look at the shock on her face. He's 26, so I'm not a grandmother yet. He tells me where the boundaries are. You know, we get on really, really well. But he's very smart, very compassionate, very tuned in. And he has his own very, clear ideas about where he wants to go in the future. It happens to be in filmmaking. I happen to be, also in that sphere somewhat. But I'm not telling him what to do or how to do it or whatever. Just to say that he's his own person, and he handles his mother by being his own person. Yeah, yeah.
Thank
and
you,
by
everybody.
knowing that in the end of the day, I'm just his mom.
Thank you, everybody. Can I ask President Khoury and Ayman to lead Christiane to the terrace, and then it's up to you how long
That was
you can
such a
stay.
pleasure. Thank you
It
all
was,
very much.
Actually, thank you all.
Thank you.